Welcome to Risky Business. I'm back after a brief hiatus. I hope you didn't miss me too much. The whole family got COVID, and then we were on vacation. It was the holidays, so it was a whole big thing. It was a little bit of a break for us. But everyone's okay. No major problems or complications, thank goodness. So with that out of the way, Square Enix continues to release their pixel remasters of the 16-bit era Final Fantasy games, one at a time. Final Fantasy V is the latest to get that treatment. Final Fantasy VI is expected to be out by February, so that should be good. And it's currently available only on mobile and PC. These bring an updated experience to the classic games, but how do they stand up against the various remakes, re-releases, and reissues we've had up to this point? We're going to talk about that today. I've previously reviewed Pixel Remasters 1 through 4, and today we're going to go ahead and take a look at 5. Final Fantasy V is one of those Final Fantasy titles that wasn't released in the West until years after its original release. It came out back in December of '92 in Japan, but it didn't get to the US until 10 years later when it was released as part of an anthology on the PlayStation. Even then, the Final Fantasy localizations were really inconsistent, and the PlayStation's long load times really made it a bad experience. I remember playing a fan translation of the game sometime around 1998, and I liked the job system and the novelty of playing a game that was so steeped in mystery at the time, but I just couldn't get into it. I made subsequent attempts over the years to complete Final Fantasy V, but I always lost interest, and I believe I made it to the final boss once, but I gave up after a few tries, mainly because I was bored. For me, this was the weakest of the 16-bit Final Fantasy games, but we'll talk more about that in a future retrospective. This review is specifically about how good the remaster is, not the game itself. Of course, the main draw of these pixel remasters is that they bring us the original graphics with a huge upgrade. Full HD and even 4K sprites and backgrounds, expanded to a widescreen resolution. There's absolutely no question that this is done masterfully here. This is probably the best of the remasters in terms of bringing these images to modern technology without sacrificing any of the charm of the original 2D title. I would go as far as to say that this remaster looks more like its original counterpart than any of the previous Pixel remasters do. It's very bright, there's tons of color, some animation has been added to previously stationary backgrounds, much like the other games that came out in the Pixel Remaster series so far. The effects are greatly improved, which is both a good and a bad thing. Spell effects, animations, and even a lot of enemies have been modified so the same assets can be used across multiple Pixel Remaster titles. Now, this sacrifices some of the unique elements of the original game. One of the things I've always loved about Final Fantasy is how each installment has had unique spell effects and enemy designs. The same spell and the same monster looks completely different from one iteration to another. But here you can see many enemies and animations reminiscent of Final Fantasy VI, which makes me expect that this game will share assets with that one. There are a few really nice touches, like the meteors appearing as these sort of high-res 3D images, and some 3/4 perspective cutscenes that were not present in the original game. Their presence here is not unwelcome, although I can definitely imagine some purists not being very thrilled about them. Like its predecessors, Final Fantasy V Pixel Remaster suffers from a similar font problem. This can be fixed on the PC version by replacing the English fonts with the Japanese fonts. It also has a tremendous amount of screen tearing on displays above 30 frames per second. I had to fix this by forcing VSync in my display driver. Thus far, the Pixel Remasters have had incredible music, and Final Fantasy V is absolutely no exception in that regard. It didn't hit me quite as hard as it did with the other remasters, but I think that might have more to do with my having less nostalgia for the original. A common thread throughout all of these remasters has been a dramatic reduction in difficulty, one that I'm happy to say is not present here. As I played through this game, I found that the game was as challenging as I remember it being. Grinding for jobs and levels still takes some time and effort, and I had to try more than once to defeat some of the bosses. You won't be able to just kind of casually breeze through this one like we could with the others. You'll have to change your job loadout during some points in the game to make sure your characters have enough valuable abilities to tackle all the game's various challenges. Just like Final Fantasy IV Pixel Remaster, you will have to go into the config and switch the ATB on if you want to use it, The game defaults to the much easier round-robin turn-based system, and I find it really bizarre that they did that, since ATB was such a big feature at the time and such a huge change to the way these games played. Quality of life improvements include a dash button, expanded equipment information, a bottomless inventory, auto battle and recovery springs that reverse KO status, and the shops are set up the same way as the other Pixel remasters, but the original version of 5 I think had all those same shop features, so it's not really a quality of life improvement in this case. The localization is up to date and it most closely resembles the GBA localizations with unified spell names, but it also has changed or updated the names of some locations, enemies, and characters. But I gotta say, it's definitely the best localization of this game that I played so far. And after playing this version, I actually like Final Fantasy V a lot better than I used to. And I think this is the best version. It's definitely the best Pixel remaster. Up until now, I've felt pretty strongly that if I'm gonna go back and play these games, I'm gonna play the original versions. I think if I'm gonna go back and play Final Fantasy V, I might play the Pixel remaster again. So I hope you've enjoyed this review of Final Fantasy V Pixel Remaster. If so, please subscribe and enable notifications so you don't miss any more of my Final Fantasy and retro gaming content. Please leave a comment and let me know your thoughts on this game. Next time, we're going to be talking about a controversial topic. In the world of role-playing games, what exactly makes a game a JRPG? Is it just because it comes from Japan, or is there a little bit more to it? We're going to talk about that next time, so please turn on notifications so you don't miss it, and until next time, game over.